So the World Cup has finally started, and I thought, why not make a similar thing but for IEMs? Which is why today we're going to do a very fun tournament ranking based off of the best IEM brands from every country. Now, since a lot of brands come from China, I'm going to do my best by placing the Western brands in different areas of the group stages to kind of even out the odds. And we're also going to have two different stages, the main group stage as well as the lower group stage bracket. The main criteria we're going to be used is number one, how versatile the variety the brand gives you in terms of not only pricing but also sound tonality. Number two, we got the value, just how good bang for your buck in terms of just pure value the brand is. Number three, do they have a flagship IEM that compete at the highest level in terms of being one of the best IEMs? And finally, number four, how good are they in terms of customer service, quality control, and just overall longevity? Yo, Editing J here. So the video ended up turning out around 55 minutes, so I'm just gonna give you guys the final results for the lower group stage brackets here. That aside, starting off on the left side of the main group stage, we got SONY from Japan versus MOONDROP from China. And when it comes to variety in terms of the price range, I would say MOONDROP does that better. They have just a lot more budget offerings from $20 all the way to $1,000, $2,000. Whereas SONY does have a lot of budget bassy earbuds that a lot of people have, but they have a huge gap before the M5. They do have some Bluetooth stuff, but we're talking about like IEMs alone. But when it comes to sound variety, MOONDROP essentially just follows their house sound. Aside from that, they're very similar in terms of just going from their budget stuff to their flagship stuff. So not a huge difference for MOONDROP, whereas SONY, even though they have less IEM variety in general, they do have more difference. So in terms of sound variety, I'm gonna give it to SONY. And when it comes to endgame sound performance, I'm gonna give it to SONY. The Z1R is just straight up a better sounding, more natural, more innovative IEM in general. Like when it came out, like 5-6 years ago, it still stacks up even in 2026. Whereas with MOONDROP, they got their Dark Saber, their new R12, they have their Solaris. All of them are kind of just okay. Like they don't wow me like the Z1Rs. So in terms of pure innovation and just sound quality, I'm gonna give it to the Sonys. When it comes to QC, MOONDROP has a history of, I don't want to say poor QC, but they do have quite a bit of channel balances. Their nozzles falling off, their condensation issues. Whereas SONY, I have not heard any QC issues with the M7, M9, Z1Rs. They might have some channel imbalances with their budget offerings like the bass boosted IEMs, the wired buds. But overall, I'm gonna say SONY has a slightly better track record when it comes to QC. And then finally, when it comes to pure value, I'm actually gonna I don't know, this is kind of hard because SONY does have very good offerings with the budget bass booster stuff. You get a free wired earphone with your phone, right? But MOONDROP also does have the Chew 2 and a lot of their budget offerings like the LAN, which are pretty solid. But where MOONDROP really falls off is once you go up the price ladder, like the new R12s, the Meters, the Solaris, the Cadence, those are very bad in value. Whereas the Z1Rs, the M9, M7, even though they are expensive, I haven't heard anyone complain that they are bad value. They're just expensive. So with all of that in consideration, I'm gonna give a slight edge to the Sonys because they do have better QC and they have a better flagship sound versus MOONDROP. Next, we got 64Audio from the States versus China's very own DUNU. I'm gonna make this very quick because I realize how long it's gonna take. So 64, they have better flagship sound, they have better customer service, whereas the DUNUs, they offer better value because they just have more IEMs at a cheaper price range, and also you can get more IEMs in general at different price ranges. But I'm gonna give the edge to the 64Audio because of the better QC and customer service, whereas DUNU, it's CHIFI. Obviously you're gonna run into some QC issues and Chinese customer service isn't always the best. Then moving down, we got Noble Audio from the States versus KINERA from China. Now in terms of pure value to performance, in terms of variety and price range, I'm gonna give it over to KINERA because it just offer a lot more IEMs around $20, $100, $200, $300, whereas Noble is obviously a more premium brand. They don't have any budget IEMs that I know of. Then when it comes to QC and customer service, I'm gonna give it to Noble because Chinese brands aren't known for their customer service. I haven't heard anything bad about Noble Audio stuff, and because they don't make any budget IEMs, their IEMs in general breaks less because they are more premium, they're more expensive, they spend more time making the IEM itself. And when it comes to sound variety, both do a very good job. They don't just, you know, repeat the same tuning like MOONDROP. So it's kind of a tie, but I'm gonna give a slight edge to KINERA because they do offer more variety at lower, you know, budget price ranges as well. And lastly, when it comes to end game flagship experience, I'm gonna give the slight edge to Noble because they have more variety and uniqueness in their tuning, whereas KINERA kind of follows their house sound from the Verdani to the Loki. Not a huge difference, even though their IEMs are very pretty, like equally as beautiful and well made as the Noble stuff. However, even though that is the case, when it comes to overall variety, KINERA still wins, and when it comes to overall, you know, score, KINERA still leads by 1 point because they have more value stuff and a wider range when it comes to the price range. Then lastly, for our final matchup on the left side, we have SOFTEARS versus LETSHUOER. Both of these are well-known Chinese IEM brands. Both of these have a pretty vast variety when it comes to price range, although I'm going to give a slight edge to LETSHUOER because they do have more budget offerings. And then when it comes to value, SOFTEARS are not known for their value. Like, just look at their recent release with the SE6. The only real good value ones are the Volume S, the RS4, and maybe the Studio 4s, but they all have to go on sale. And when it comes to overall sound variety, LETSHUOER also wins in that area as well. SOFTEARS follows more of that similar, you know, SOFTEARS house sound, whereas LETSHUOER, they do experiment a lot more. And when it comes to QC and customer service, both of these are CHIFI brands. I haven't heard huge, you know, issues with either one of them. I would say they're pretty similar in terms of that. And lastly, when it comes to flagship offering, LETSHUOER has their Condensa 12, they have their EJ07, one of my favorite IEMs, and then SOFTEARS have their RS10 and the Cerberus and stuff like that. So pretty tight in terms of the overall flagship experience as well. However, LETSHUOER still wins overall because of their better variety, better value, and more, you know, IEMs across different price ranges. Moving on to the right side of the main group stage, we got FATFREQ from Singapore versus Unique Melody, which I do believe is a Chinese brand. Now, when it comes to variety in terms of sound and the price range, both of these are pretty similar because they're more premium brands. They have a good variety in terms of the sound profile. FATFREQ has their switches. They also have their more mid-range stuff like the Sakura, whereas Unique Melody has a flatter sound, more different and unique than other, you know, IEM brands. And when it comes to value, both of these are more premium brands. They're not known to be like a bang for your buck kind of brand like SIMGAAT, right? So I would say it's like a three-way tie in terms of value, variety, and price range. And when it comes to flagship sound experience, I would also say it's pretty similar. Like, you got the Grand Maestro from FATFREQ, very versatile, and then you got the Mess and the Mason stuff from Unique Melody as well. Overall, I'm gonna say also pretty close to a tie when it comes to endgame level sound experience. However, where the scale does tip is when it comes to the QC and customer service. FATFREQ had a whole shit show with the HBB Deuce rollout. You know, a lot of people didn't get their stuff and it was just got delayed. Bad QC with the first batch. That collab alone really hurt FATFREQ's overall brand reputation. They tried to fix it, but a lot of trust issues going into buying new, you know, FATFREQ stuff. Whereas with Unique Melody, I haven't heard any horrible scandals when it comes to QC, customer service. They seem to be pretty chill, pretty stable overall. The other aspects are pretty tied, but the QC and customer service does edge out Unique Melody over the FATFREQ stuff. Then after those, we got China's very own FIIO, which is like right up there with MOONDROP, and then we got Singapore's very own ELYSIAN. Now, when it comes to sound variety, price range offerings, and pure value, FIIO does that a lot better than ELYSIAN IEMs. They just have a lot more offerings. They experiment a little bit more than ELYSIAN, even though ELYSIAN does experiment a little bit themselves. Overall, when it comes to just value, you're gonna get better stuff with FIIO offerings. Whereas when it comes to pure endgame sound experience, I'm gonna give that to ELYSIAN with the Annihilator. It's still one of the best endgame IEMs you can get. FIIO does have their new flagship, the FX17, which is pretty good for an endgame IEM, but overall, I'm gonna give the edge to the Annihilator when it comes to imaging, you know, musicality, overall resolution and performance. However, similar to FATFREQ, ELYSIAN also has pretty bad QC and customer service. I did a whole review on the ELYSIAN where I got a very bad channel imbalance and then a horrible customer service experience with the CEO himself. So yeah, when it comes to customer service and QC, FIIO definitely does that better, and then the price range variety, FIIO does that better as well, and value as well. Then moving down to the right side of the group stage, we got Germany's very own Sennheiser versus China's very own THIEAUDIO. THIEAUDIO does have more variety in general, where Sennheiser has the IE200s and some other stuff. They are fairly similar, maybe a slight edge to the sound variety to THIEAUDIO. Now value wise, I'm gonna give this to THIEAUDIO. They just have more value, friendly IEMs like the Monarchs, the Hype series. You got even the Oracles, right? Whereas Sennheiser, they do have the IE200, which is, I guess, okay if you get it on sale. They got the IE600, which, definitely overpriced. You need those to go on sale. So value does go to THIEAUDIO. And when it comes to QC and customer service, both of these are pretty good. I haven't heard any huge scandals or huge customer service issues or channel imbalances. Both of them are pretty solid. Maybe a slight edge to Sennheiser because they are a bigger company with a more Western backing and philosophy when it comes to quality control. But overall, pretty close. And lastly, when it comes to an IEM flagship experience, I'm going to give it to THIEAUDIO with the Valhallas. You also have more variety in general with the V16, with the Prestige LTDs, the Monarch, stuff like that. Overall, I'm going to give it to THIEAUDIO when it comes to endgame experience. With that said, THIEAUDIO does move on to the next stage. And lastly, we got TANGZU versus ZIIGAAT. Both are Chinese brands with a very similar lineup and price range offering. They both have value offerings like the Warner, the Chang'e, and then you got the Nuo. You have the mid-fi stuff like the Zhangliao, the Wuzitian. You got the Odyssey, the Lush, the Crescent, and then you got the more expensive stuff like the Xuanwu Gate. You got the Bajie, you got the Tianpeng, you got the Arcanus, you got the Lunas, and then the endgame stuff with the Wukong and the Jupiter, which is a collab, but it still counts. So both offer a similar variety when it comes to price range, but they prioritize different price categories. ZIIGAAT targets more the $200, $300 range, whereas TANGZU is more in the $500, $600, and then the budget stuff from like $20 to $80. And when it comes to variety, I would say TANGZU has a little bit more variety, but quality wise, I'm gonna say ZIIGAAT just does that a lot better because TANGZU lately have been turning out some duds with the Asla, Noir Blanc. You got like the Fudoverse 2, which isn't that great. You got the Xuetao. And then when it comes to value, TANGZU is very good in the cheaper price range with the Warner, with the Yuxuanji. Whereas ZIIGAAT is still fine in the budget range, but they excel and they kind of take over when it comes to the mid-fi, $200, $300 range with the Odyssey, the Crescent. Whereas TANGZU does start to fall off as you go up the price range with the Tianpeng, the Bajie, you got the Wukong, which is also pretty mid. And then they also have a new 1DD, $500 IEM, which doesn't help, the conversation either. Whereas ZIIGAAT is still okay in the higher price range with the Arcanus, the Luna, and then the Jupiter is also pretty solid, even though it might not be like a value banger. It's still better than the Wukong in my opinion. And when it comes to QC and customer service, both of these are in the mid tier. They're not amazing, they're not horrible. They're just, kind of okay. So far, it's been a tie across the price range, the value, variety, and QC. I'm going to give it a slight edge to ZIIGAAT because I like their tuning and their sound slightly better than the TANGZU stuff. Again, the Wukong, even though it's their flagship, I'm going to say it's kind of a miss because it's not the best. Like, if you tried it, it's a bit peaky, it's unrefined. Yeah, I'm going to give a tiny slight edge to ZIIGAAT. Then moving on to the left side of the quarterfinals, we got Japan's very own SONY versus America's very own 64Audio. Now, personally, I like the Z1Rs a little bit more because of the realism and the treble of the better bass texture. And also, you totally just have a vocal scoop that feels unnatural to me. But when it comes to variety and just overall offering across the price range, I do think 64Audio does that better. They just have more offerings. They have a lot more choices that you can choose from. Value wise, both of these are fairly similar. They're not a budget brand. They're not known for being a bang for your buck kind of IEM. They have more premium offerings. And lastly, when it comes to QC and customer service, both of these are fairly similar. I haven't heard major scandals from the higher end IEMs. Obviously the budget stuff from Sony are gonna have some channel imbalance, but no huge scandals. I will say though, 64Audio does have better customer service from what I've heard because they are a smaller brand. They can be more hands-on with their customers, reach out to you faster, get it done faster. And they are still innovating with the planar, the Valor, and their new releases, whereas Sony kind of just stopped their IEM releases at the seminar. So overall, even though it is still very close, I'm going to give a slight edge to THIEAUDIO because of the customer service and their more modern innovation. Then after those, we got two brands from China, LETSHUOER versus KINERA. Both of these are older legacy Chinese Chi-Fi brands. They're pretty well known. When it comes to sound variety and price range variety, they are a tie essentially. They have an IEM basically every price range, and they also experiment a lot with their IEMs as well. So I'm going to say a tie there. But when it comes to value, I'm going to give a slight edge to LETSHUOER because they don't have the premium, artisan, handcrafted tags that KINERA has. KINERA IEMs are more of an art piece. They look very beautiful, but you're also paying a slight premium because of that hands-on, handcrafted action. And when it comes to QC and customer service, both have been pretty great. Like I personally reached out to LETSHUOER themselves to get my stuff replaced. KINERA has also been pretty friendly in general. So yeah, also a tie in terms of that. And then when it comes to flagship and game experience, they are also pretty close. LETSHUOER has the Cadenza 12, KINERA has the low-key and their newer bone conduction driver that they're messing around with. They're all both pretty good, depends on your sound preference. I'm gonna say KINERA is slightly more expensive. So again, goes back to value overall. I'm going to say LETSHUOER does edge out KINERA just by a little because of the value factor. Then moving on to the right side of the quarterfinals, we got FIIO from China versus Unique Melody. FIIO is an all-rounder brand that targets both the budget, the mid-fi, and the high-end segment, whereas Unique Melody targets more of the premium and high-end brand. They don't have any, budget offerings under $100 or $50, $20. So when it comes to variety, I'm going to give the slight edge to FIIO when it comes to just price ranges. But as for sound, uniqueness, and variety, I'm going to give it to Unique Melody because they are just more different in the tuning. They are less traditional, more innovative when it comes to that. However, value-wise, I'm going to give it over to FIIO because they just have more budget offerings. Overall, you get more bang for your buck when it comes to the drivers as well. The FX17, for example, has 8 SONY and ESTs. You're just not going to get that with a Unique Melody IEM, even though pricing wise, they're not too bad either. And when it comes to customer service and QC, FIIO does have a better record of their return policies, whereas Unique Melody, they're more of a boutique brand. You might have to pay more out of pocket. The final segment is endgame performance, and I will give that to Unique Melody because they just have more offerings in the high-end segment with the Mason. You got the Mest, whereas FIIO really only has the FX17. In the end, both have 2 points and a tie, so I guess I'll be the tiebreaker because of the value factor and the overall versatility in the price range. FIIO is more accessible to more people. They are more of a people's brand, whereas Unique Melody is obviously more premium and high end. And because of the accessibility, I'm going to give a slight edge to FIIO. Then finally, for our final matchup on the right side, we got THIEAUDIO versus ZIIGAAT. Both are Chinese brands. When it comes to price range versatility, THIEAUDIO in the earlier days does match ZIIGAAT when it comes to the budget offerings, but nowadays they don't have much stuff. ZIIGAAT obviously has a lot more offerings in the low end, whereas THIEAUDIO does the high end better with the Valhalla. You got more offerings with the LTDs, you got the Monarchs, the Hype-10, and stuff like that. This is more or less a tie depending on which price category you're looking for. For example, if you want more mid-fi, more premium and high-end stuff, THIEAUDIO would be better. If you want budget stuff, then ZIIGAAT would be better. And when it comes to tuning variety, I would say this is a tie as well. ZIIGAAT has a lot more offerings in the budget end, but in the earlier days, THIEAUDIO had the Legacy, the Oracle, Clairvoyance, right? They got the Monarch, LTDs. Overall, not too much of a difference, but where the scale does tip is when it comes to the value. I would say overall ZIIGAAT has better value offerings with the Odyssey, with the Crescent, the Luna, the budget stuff like the Lush, you got the Nuos. THIEAUDIO is obviously a more premium brand, so it's not really a budget. Then when it comes to QC and overall customer service, again, they are fairly similar, but I'm going to give a slight edge to THIEAUDIO because there's just less channel imbalances, less, I guess, like things breaking because they don't have any budget IEMs. Whereas, if you get a Nuo or the Chinos, you might get like a dead cable here and there because they're a lot cheaper versus, the Hype 4s, the Oracles, and stuff like that. And lastly, when it comes to endgame IEM experience, this is going to go to THIEAUDIO because of the Valhalla, Prestige, LTD, you got the V16, you got the Monarchs. Not only do they have more offerings in general, but their offerings are also of a higher quality versus the Jupiter, which is more or less the only offering that ZIIGAAT has. So overall, this is going to be a 2-1 win for THIEAUDIO. Then moving on to the left side of the semifinals, finals, we got 64 audio from the States versus LETSHUOER from China. When it comes to price range variety, LETSHUOER is gonna win here. They have a lot more budget offerings from $20 to $50, $100, $200, all the way to $2,000. Whereas 64 audio is obviously more of a premium brand, and they target more in the high end and the mid-fi section. Similarly, when it comes to value, LETSHUOER does that better as well. Not only do they have more budget bang for your buck IEMs in general, but their higher end offering is also better value, with the Mystic 8 being better than the 4S, and then the Cat 12 is better than the 12Ts. And when it comes to tuning variety, LETSHUOER also does that better as well. 64 has their house sound, the vocal scoop. And lastly, when it comes to end game sound experience, I'm gonna give a slight edge to 64 audio because they have more expensive IEMs in the high-end segment, whereas LETSHUOER only really has the Cat 12 and the EJ10s. Quality wise, they're fairly similar, really subjective on what you like, but in general it's still going to be 3-1 or 3-2 if you want to be generous over to LETSHUOER. Then moving on to the right side of the semifinals, we got FIIO versus THIEAUDIO, and FIIO is a more all-rounder kind of brand. They're going to be better when it comes to the price range. They have more offerings in the budget segment. The value wise, it's going to be better because they have more budget IEMs. Tonality wise, more or less similar. I mean, you can argue that FIIO does experiment a little bit more, but I would also argue that THIEAUDIO also does that the same. So I'm gonna actually say it's gonna be a tie when it comes to tonal variety. And when it comes to QC and customer service, I'm gonna give a slight edge to THIEAUDIO because they have less budget stuff that are gonna break. Then lastly, when it comes to endgame IEM experience, I'm gonna give it over to THIEAUDIO. Not only do they have more offering in the high-end segment with the Valhallas, the Monarchs, Prestige, the V16, but they're also better tuned, more musical to me personally than what FIIO has to offer with the FX17, which leads us to a difficult conclusion because both have 2 points and a tie, which makes me the tiebreaker once again. However, this time I am going to go with THIEAUDIO because I do enjoy their high-end offering with the Valhallas, one of the best endgame IEMs you can get. You got a lot of offerings, good value endgame IEMs with the Monarchs, the Hype 10s even, the Prestige. Their older stuff did have budget-friendly stuff with the, legacy IEMs. You got your Hype 4 stuff as well. Overall, I do like THIEAUDIO as a brand overall when it comes to musicality and tonality. And then finally, for our grand finals, we got LETSHUOER versus THIEAUDIO. Now, when it comes to the price range variety, I'm gonna give that to LETSHUOER. They just have a lot more stuff between different budget. They got stuff in $50, $100, $200, $300, $500, all the way to $2,000. Whereas THIEAUDIO, even though back in the day they had the legacy stuff, nowadays they only really have the Hype 4, right, to start off, and then you got the Monarchs and go up all the way to the Valhallas. And similarly, when it comes to tonal variety, LETSHUOER also experiment a little bit more. You got the Joe 7s to the KINERA 12 to the Mystic 8s. You got the new Australis, right? You got the Amber. They just have more unique, different sound. Whereas THIEAUDIO, they have the house sound that is pretty well balanced. So overall variety, I'm gonna give that to LETSHUOER as well. Now, when it comes to QC and customer service, I'm gonna give the slight edge to THIEAUDIO because they have less budget, cheaper IEMs. They break less. Overall, you're gonna get a better experience with returns. Then when it comes to endgame level IEMs, now normally I would prefer LETSHUOER because of the original EJ07, and then they got the older Cat 12, the pre 2025 version, which is less bright. But because we're going off recent stuff, THIEAUDIO does have a better, endgame IEM with the Valhallas, V16, the Prestige stuff. LETSHUOER is still fine, but the Cat 12, the new one, is a little bit too bright, and then the EJ07 is discontinued. You can't get any more. Now, currently we are tied at 2 points each, which means our last category, the value price category, is going to be our tiebreaker. When it comes to the endgame stuff, I'm going to give the slight edge to the value to THIEAUDIO with the Monarchs. I think the Valhalla is a slightly better IEM than the Cat 12. I think the Prestige stuff is also pretty good in that price segment. However, when it comes to just like budget stuff, you got your S12s, you got your Australis, you got your DZ4, you got your cheaper stuff. LETSHUOER does that a lot better. They don't bottleneck themselves as a premium brand. When it comes to pure accessibility and just versatility, I'm gonna say LETSHUOER is the best IEM brand according to this tournament ranking. But that aside, if you're curious about the final ranking, in second place obviously we got THIEAUDIO. In third place I'm gonna say FIIO, and then fourth place a toss-up between 64 Audio, KINERA, or you can even put ELYSIAN in there if you want to. And then after that, you have a lot of options here. We got ZIIGAAT, you got TANGZU, you got SOFTEARS, Zens, KIBIERS, Pennon. Not a huge difference. They're all around the same level. So yeah, I hope this little, tournament, FIFA World Cup inspired IEM tournament was helpful, was fun. Let me know what your favorite brand would be. Obviously, this might not be the most accurate, but I tried my best. I hope this is helpful. I hope this was fun, and I will see everyone in the next video.
Special thanks to Mr. Dom Q, Zenu, B. Urak, Walker Standard, User, Scressa, Guava Juice Bane, Polly J, Mr. Gorilla, CT Jax, Henry Claudia, Son of a Horse, 777ZK, PM The Wizard, Obi, Triple Well Extended, Mad Herc, TR8, Shembakle, FKSRG, Cousin Fat Fat, Tomat Pat for Shake, Twale, Addy, Michael, Trackstar, Raphael, Ori, Ryan, Juniper, Effinadim, Chimika, Raj, Javir, Gelbog, Ocean, BC Knight, AK131, Emin Gelato, On Balance, Vitor, Tuna, JRX, Samuel, John Simon, Archie, Forrest, Ninja Watcher, The Audio, Brendan Fish, Sir Eisen, JPLA, Partly Timed, Blue Nerd, ATGBB, Furuto, Geranium, Spinner, Sam Z, Raj, Your Boy Banana, Etune, Suli, Grizzly, Leanne, Scaffrog, Mark M, Sidigidi, Voltage, The Hyperion, Mega, Francis, RJ, Doc Naruto, It's Mark, Hedgehog, and another. Thank you guys so much for the support.